In 1999, ABC executives slid a contract across the table that would ultimately destroy America's favorite family. On screen, Tim Allen and Patricia Richardson were TV's perfect couple. But behind the scenes, Patricia was living a nightmare. She spent 8 years working grueling 16-hour days, mothering 3 fake TV sons while her real marriage collapsed under the weight of $1 billion machine. When the network offered her an insulting $25 million, exactly half of Tim's salary, she bravely walked away to raise her actual children. The ABC network found their blue-collar hero in Tim Allen. At the time, Allen was a highly successful stand-up comedian whose entire routine was built around a specific brand of hypermasculinity, grunting, loving power tools, and failing to understand women. The network executives saw dollar signs. They built a sitcom entirely around his stand-up persona. The premise was brilliant in its simplicity. Tim Taylor was the host of a local cable DIY show called Tool Time. But despite his supposed expertise with hammers and drills, he was utterly incompetent at fixing the emotional mechanics of his own household. The network had their leading man, they had their premise, and they had a green-lit pilot. But they had a massive, glaring problem with the most important role in the show, the wife. In the original unaired pilot of Home Improvement, the character of Jill Taylor was played by actress Frances Fisher. Fisher is a phenomenal, highly trained dramatic actress, but according to the producers and the test audiences, her dynamic with Tim Allen simply did not work. She played the role too seriously. When Tim Allen delivered a goofy slapstick joke, Fisher's reaction felt like genuine heavy marital resentment. The comedy died in the space between them. Days before the show was scheduled to go into full production, the network panicked. They fired Fisher. They needed a new Jill Taylor immediately, and the casting directors were scrambling. This is where Patricia Richardson enters the narrative, and the circumstances of her hiring reveal a fascinating, deeply ironic hidden detail about the birth of America's favorite TV mom. When the producers frantically called Patricia Richardson to come in and read for the part, she was not a hungry, ambitious young actress desperately seeking fame. She was a 39-year-old mother who had absolutely zero desire to star in a sitcom. In fact, she was actively trying to avoid it. She was being asked to trade the final fleeting years of her children's youth for a corporate bribe. She was a working-class actor who just wanted to do occasional guest spots or theater work that wouldn't consume her life. When she walked into the audition room, she didn't care about impressing the executives. She was tired, she was blunt, and she was not intimidated by Tim Allen. When Allen delivered his lines, Richardson fired back with a natural, sharp, and grounded sarcasm. She didn't just roll her eyes at his hyper-masculine antics. She challenged him. She matched his comedic energy perfectly, toe to toe. The producers were ecstatic. They offered her the role on the spot. Richardson hesitated. She warned the producers that she was breastfeeding, that she was exhausted, and that she didn't look like a glamorous Hollywood television wife. The producers did not care. They promised to accommodate her schedule, they promised to build a nursery on the set for her twins, and they practically begged her to sign the contract. Reluctantly, out of financial practicality for her growing family, Patricia Richardson signed the contract. She stepped onto the Disney studio lot, completely unaware that she had just signed away the next 8 years of her life to a corporate behemoth that would eventually consume her actual family to fuel a fictional one. When Home Improvement premiered in the autumn of 1991, it did not just become a hit, it became a cultural phenomenon. Within its first few seasons, it rocketed to the #1 spot in the Nielsen ratings. It anchored ABC's entire comedy lineup. The show generated billions of dollars for the network through premium advertising slots, global syndication rights, and a massive merchandising empire that sold everything from tool-time tool belts to video games. In 1994, Tim Allen achieved an unprecedented pop culture trifecta. He had the #1 television show on the air, the #1 book on the New York Times bestseller list, and the #1 movie at the box office with the Santa Claus. He was the undisputed king of Hollywood. But the soul of Home Improvement, the actual beating emotional heart that kept the audience coming back week after week, was Patricia Richardson. If Tim Allen provided the slapstick comedy and the physical gags, Richardson provided the reality. Jill Taylor was not a weak, two-dimensional, stereotypical sitcom housewife. She was an intelligent, fiercely independent woman. She went back to university to get her degree. She openly challenged her husband's archaic views on gender. She was the emotional anchor guiding 3 teenage boys through the turbulent waters of adolescence. Because Richardson brought such a grounded, authentic, and fiercely intelligent energy to the role, the Taylor family transcended the bounds of a simple comedy. They became the blueprint. Millions of viewers looked at Tim and Jill Taylor and saw the ideal, perfectly balanced modern marriage. The ABC network actively marketed this illusion. They sold the concept of the perfect American family to massive corporate sponsors. They leaned heavily on the wholesome moral lessons that concluded every episode. Home Improvement was a safe, family-friendly sanctuary in an increasingly cynical world, but television is a factory. It is an industrial machine designed to manufacture human emotion for profit. And the cost of manufacturing that perfect television family was about to be extracted directly from the woman who anchored it. To the millions of viewers tuning into the ABC network every Tuesday night, the Taylor household was a beacon of stability. The living room set of Home Improvement was bathed in warm, artificial sunlight. The conflicts were low stakes and easily resolved. Tim would accidentally blow up a dishwasher. Jill would roll her eyes and deliver a sharp, loving reprimand. The 3 boys would learn a valuable lesson about brotherhood, and the credits would roll. It was a flawless, highly profitable 22-minute simulation of the American dream. But the reality of manufacturing that simulation was a brutal, relentless, industrial grind. And the human toll of that grind fell disproportionately on the shoulders of Patricia Richardson. When you watch a sitcom, it is easy to forget that television is a factory. In the 1990s, producing 24 episodes of a top-tier network comedy every single year required an astonishing amount of physical and mental endurance. The schedule was unforgiving. It was not a glamorous red carpet lifestyle. It was a blue-collar job executed in windowless sound stages in Burbank, California. For Patricia Richardson, who had originally warned the producers that she was an exhausted mother of a toddler and newborn twins, the promises made by the network during her audition quickly evaporated. The studio had promised to accommodate her. They had promised a manageable schedule, but when Home Improvement became a billion-dollar cash cow, those promises were crushed under the immense pressure of corporate demands. Her daily reality became a logistical and emotional nightmare. A standard work week on the Home Improvement set demanded 14 to 16-hour days. Imagine the reality of her alarm clock. Richardson had to wake up in the pitch-black hours of the early morning, long before her 3 actual children were awake. She would leave her home, drive to the Disney studio lot, and sit in a hair and makeup chair for 2 hours to be transformed into Jill Taylor. Then began the endless cycle of table reads, blocking rehearsals, camera lighting tests, and frantic, last-minute script rewrites handed down by anxious network executives. By the time the director yelled cut on a Friday night live audience taping, it was often past midnight. Richardson would drive home, physically depleted and emotionally hollowed out, to a dark house where her real children had already been put to bed by a nanny. This created a devastating, inescapable psychological dissonance. On the soundstage, Patricia Richardson was required to pour every ounce of her maternal energy into 3 child actors, Zachary Ty Bryan, Jonathan Taylor Thomas, and Taryn Noah Smith. She had to hug them, wipe their tears, scold them, and guide them through their fictional teenage milestones. She was contractually obligated to be highly present, emotionally available, and deeply invested in the lives of her fake television sons. But while she was being paid millions of dollars to actively mother these child actors under the bright studio lights, she was systematically forced to abandon her own flesh and blood children in the shadows. The psychological torture of this dynamic is difficult to overstate. Richardson was suffering from a crushing, suffocating level of mom guilt. She was missing the fundamental building blocks of her own children's lives. She was absent for the parent-to-teacher conferences, the school plays, the first steps, and the bedtime stories. The network had purchased her time, her face, and her maternal instincts, leaving absolutely nothing left in the tank for the people who actually needed her. And the Hollywood press only twisted the knife deeper. As Home Improvement dominated the global ratings, Patricia Richardson was universally lauded as the ultimate mother. She won awards. She was nominated for Emmys and Golden Globes. She was featured on the covers of glossy magazines with journalists endlessly praising her for redefining the modern matriarch. She was hailed as the perfect balance of career woman and loving wife. The hypocrisy of this public narrative was unbearable to her. The world was throwing trophies at her for being a spectacular mother to 3 boys she did not give birth to, while she was privately weeping in her dressing room because she hadn't seen her own toddlers awake in 3 days. The television industry was preaching family values to the American public, generating billions of dollars off the concept of the sacred family dinner table, all while ruthlessly destroying the family dinner table of their leading lady. She was living a massive, highly publicized lie. Human beings can only sustain that level of intense emotional compartmentalization for so long before the foundation begins to crack. For Patricia Richardson, the breaking point arrived right at the absolute zenith of the show's success. The year was 1995. Home Improvement was an unstoppable juggernaut. Tim Allen was one of the highest paid men in the entertainment industry. The show was practically printing money for the ABC network. But inside Richardson's real home, the walls were collapsing. Her marriage to fellow actor Ray Baker, which had already been under immense strain from the punishing demands of her production schedule, finally fractured entirely. The brutal mechanics of Hollywood success are rarely kind to a marriage. When one partner is suddenly thrust into the blinding spotlight of global fame, working 16-hour days and carrying the weight of $1 billion franchise, the oxygen is completely sucked out of the relationship. The couple simply had no time, no energy, and no space to repair the damage. In 1995, Patricia Richardson and Ray Baker filed for divorce. This personal tragedy fundamentally altered her reality on the set of Home Improvement. Richardson was now a single mother of 3 young, deeply vulnerable children, navigating the trauma of a broken home. Yet she still had to drive to the Disney lot every single morning, put on the makeup, and pretend to be half of America's most perfect, resilient marriage. She had to stand in the fictional Taylor kitchen, trade witty banter with Tim Allen, and deliver moral lessons about the enduring power of marital love, all while her own heart was completely shattered. She had to act as the grounded, rational anchor for Tim the Toolman Taylor, projecting an aura of absolute domestic stability while actively coordinating custody schedules and meeting with divorce attorneys between camera setups. The cognitive dissonance evolved from uncomfortable to entirely toxic. The network executives did not care about her divorce so long as it did not affect her comedic timing. They did not care about her crushing guilt as a single mother so long as she hit her marks and delivered the ratings. The corporate machine demanded that the illusion of the Taylor family remain pristine and uninterrupted. But as the show pushed past its fifth, sixth, and seventh seasons, something inside Patricia Richardson began to harden. The exhaustion mutated into a profound, undeniable clarity. She looked at her growing children. She realized that the millions of dollars piling up in her bank account could not buy back the years she had lost. She realized that the ABC network was a vampire, continuously feeding on her real life to sustain a fictional one. She was tired of pretending. She was tired of the hypocrisy. She desperately wanted to stop acting, stop pretending to be Jill Taylor, and finally step into the only role that truly mattered to her, being a full-time, present mother to her own kids. As season 8 loomed on the horizon in 1998, Richardson began quietly making her intentions known to the producers. She was done. She wanted out. She was exhausted, her children needed her, and she had given the network the best years of her life. But the ABC network was not about to let their golden goose walk away without a fight. The executives looked at the staggering revenue generated by the show, and they looked at the single mother who anchored it. They assumed, as corporate executives always do, that every human being has a price. They believed that maternal guilt and physical exhaustion could simply be erased with a large enough check. They were about to launch a desperate, highly calculated power play to keep her trapped on that soundstage. And in doing so, they would reveal a blatant, insulting gender bias so profound that it would finally give Patricia Richardson the absolute justification she needed to burn the illusion to the ground. By the time the calendar turned to 1998, the American television landscape was experiencing a massive seismic shift. The golden era of the 1990s sitcom was beginning to show its age. Legendary culture-defining programs like Seinfeld were voluntarily closing their doors, walking away while they were still at the absolute peak of the ratings. The network executives residing in the glass towers of Los Angeles were terrified of this trend. They were desperate to hold on to their legacy properties, terrified of the impending vacuum that would be left behind if their flagship shows vanished from the weekly schedule. For the ABC network, owned by the corporate behemoth Disney, Home Improvement was not just a successful comedy. It was the structural load-bearing pillar of their entire primetime lineup. As the cast and crew began filming the 8th season, the network executives looked at their financial projections and realized they could not afford to let the Taylor family fade to black. They needed a 9th season. They needed the advertising revenue, the syndication packages, and the unshakable demographic dominance that Tim and Jill Taylor provided every single Tuesday night. But down on the studio lot, a very different reality had taken root. Patricia Richardson had reached her absolute definitive limit. The adrenaline of stardom had long since faded, leaving behind a bone-weary mother who was no longer playing a role, but surviving a marathon. She had endured the collapse of her real-life marriage. She was actively raising 3 young children as a newly single mother. Her mom guilt had metastasized into a profound, suffocating exhaustion. She had given the best years of her adult life to manufacturing a fake family, and she had nothing left in the tank. Richardson made her intentions unequivocally clear to the producers. She was done. She did not want to negotiate. She did not want a reduced schedule. She wanted to walk away from the soundstage, hang up Jill Taylor's wardrobe, and finally go home to be a full-time mother to her own flesh and blood. In a rational, empathetic industry, this would have been the end of the conversation. A dedicated employee, having fulfilled her contractual obligations for 8 highly profitable years, was tendering her resignation to care for her family. But the Hollywood machine does not speak the language of human empathy. It speaks the exclusive, ruthless language of leverage and capital. The executives at ABC fundamentally misunderstood the woman they were dealing with. When a television star complains about exhaustion or threatens to leave a hit show, the network usually interprets it as a standard, calculated negotiating tactic. They assume it is simply a loud theatrical demand for a bigger paycheck. They operate under the cynical corporate belief that absolutely everyone has a price, and that a mother's guilt can easily be sedated if you slide enough zeros across the boardroom table. Driven by panic and corporate greed, the network executives drafted what they believed was the ultimate retention strategy. In early 1999, as the 8th season was wrapping up, they called Tim Allen and Patricia Richardson to the negotiating table to pitch a 9th season. They did not offer a heartfelt plea. They dropped an astronomical, culture-shifting amount of money onto the table, but the distribution of that money revealed a blatant, humiliating gender bias so profound that it permanently destroyed the illusion of the perfect television marriage. The network executives turned to Tim Allen, the man who provided the grunts and the physical slapstick comedy. They offered him a staggering $50 million for a single 22-episode season. To put that number into perspective, it equated to over $2 million per episode. It was an unprecedented, earth-shattering sum of money for television in 1999. It was the ultimate corporate reward for the golden boy. Tim Allen, whose own career had been entirely resurrected and defined by the show, naturally accepted the offer. Allen's record-breaking windfall had evaporated in an instant, and in the high-stakes world of Hollywood, that kind of loss breeds deep resentment. Then, the executives turned to Patricia Richardson. They looked at the woman who had anchored the emotional core of their billion-dollar franchise. Despite being the invisible architect of the show's emotional success, the network's ledger still viewed her as a supporting player. To them, she was an accessory. To the audience, she was the anchor. They offered her $25 million for the 9th season. In the cold, calculating vacuum of a corporate boardroom, the executives likely patted themselves on the back. They genuinely believed they were making a generous historical offer. $25 million for a single year of work is an unfathomable amount of wealth to the average human being. It is the kind of money that buys private islands, generational security, and absolute freedom. They fully expected Richardson to gasp in gratitude, pick up the pen, and sign away another year of her children's lives. Instead, the offer operated as a blinding, clarifying flash of lightning. The sheer insulting audacity of the gender pay gap was impossible to ignore. This was not 1950, this was 1999. Over on the NBC network, the cast of Friends was actively and fiercely negotiating as a unified front, demanding that the men and women be paid the exact same salary per episode. The cultural conversation around equal pay for equal work was already happening. Yet the ABC network looked at the matriarch of their most important family comedy and explicitly told her that her biological reality, her artistic contribution, and her personal sacrifice were worth exactly 50% of the man sitting next to her. Their justification was entirely bankrupt. The network argued that the show was originally conceived around Tim Allen's stand-up routine, making him the titular star, but by the 8th season, that argument was a hollow corporate excuse to undervalue a woman. Home Improvement was no longer a show about a stand-up comedian. It was a show about a marriage. It was a two-hander. If Tim Allen left, the show died. But equally, if Patricia Richardson left, the show died. The audience tuned in for the dynamic between the husband and the wife. Their leverage was identical. Their workload was identical. But the network's respect was viciously divided along gender lines. The executives had essentially placed a $25 million trap on the table. They were daring her to walk away from a fortune. They assumed the sheer weight of the money would force her into compliance, effectively placing her in a pair of golden handcuffs. What happened next is one of the bravest, most unapologetic acts of defiance in the history of American television. Patricia Richardson looked at the contract. She looked at the $25 million. She looked at the network executives who had systematically drained her physical and emotional health for nearly a decade. She looked at her co-star, who was eagerly waiting for her to sign so he could secure his own $50 million payday. And she said no. She refused the offer. She did not counteroffer for $30 million. She did not demand parity with Tim Allen to stay. She simply, firmly, and unequivocally rejected the contract. The executives were completely stunned. The room descended into a frantic, panicked chaos. They could not comprehend the reality of a television actress turning down $25 million. They tried to pressure her. They reminded her of the legacy of the show. They reminded her of the crew who would lose their jobs if the program was canceled. They attempted to weaponize her empathy against her, a classic corporate tactic used to manipulate women into sacrificing their own boundaries for the greater good of the company. They even floated a bizarre, cruel alternative. If she refused to do a full season, they asked if she would just do a handful of episodes so they could kill off the character of Jill Taylor. They genuinely proposed airing a storyline where America's favorite mother dies, just so Tim Allen could collect his $50 million and continue the show as a grieving widower. Richardson categorically refused. She knew that killing Jill Taylor would permanently destroy the wholesome, comforting legacy of the Taylor family. It would be a grotesque, cynical betrayal of the audience that had invited them into their living rooms for 8 years. She was fiercely protective of the character she had built, and she was not going to allow the network to murder Jill Taylor for a temporary spike in the Nielsen ratings. She stood her ground against a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The reason Patricia Richardson could walk away from $25 million is profoundly simple, yet entirely alien to the executives who run the entertainment industry. She realized that the money was blood money. It was a massive, highly taxed bribe offered in direct exchange for the remaining formative years of her children's youth. She had already missed the first steps. She had already missed the preschool plays. She had already navigated a divorce while trying to memorize punchlines. If she signed that contract, she refused to let the ghost of Jill Taylor haunt her children's formative years any longer. The network was buying a performance. She was reclaiming a a childhood. No amount of corporate money, not 25 million, not 50 million, not $1 billion, could buy back the childhood of her real kids. Once that time is gone, it is permanently erased from the earth. The network was offering her a fortune, but they were demanding her soul in return. By saying no, Patricia Richardson executed the ultimate defining act of a true mother. She prioritized her actual breathing family over her career, over her ego, and over an obscene amount of wealth. She chose her children over the machine. It was a beautiful, deeply principled decision. She had successfully drawn a boundary that the Hollywood system could not penetrate. But the ABC network is not a forgiving entity. By refusing the contract, Patricia Richardson had effectively signed the death warrant for the network's biggest cash cow. She had cost them hundreds of millions of dollars in projected future revenue. She had broken the cardinal rule of the entertainment industry. She had stopped the money from flowing. The executives were humiliated by her refusal, and their panic rapidly mutated into a vicious corporate vindictiveness. They could not force her to sign the contract, but they could absolutely punish her for walking away. The corporate machine was about to pivot its vast, highly influential resources away from marketing her as America's favorite mother and towards systematically destroying her public reputation. When Patricia Richardson walked out of that corporate boardroom in early 1999, leaving a $25 million contract unsigned on the table, she effectively triggered $1 billion implosion. She had done the unthinkable in Hollywood. She had unilaterally shut down a money-making machine. The executives at ABC and Disney were left staring at the wreckage of their primetime schedule. They could not legally force her to return for a 9th season, and they knew that continuing Home Improvement without the matriarch of the Taylor family would be a catastrophic creative and financial failure. The show was officially dead. In a healthy, functioning workplace, a dedicated employee retiring after 8 years of exemplary service is met with gratitude, a severance package, and a warm farewell. But the entertainment industry is not a normal workplace. It is an ecosystem built entirely on leverage, ego, and public perception. The network executives were furious, and their immediate instinct was not to graciously accept her resignation, but to aggressively control the narrative. If they were going to lose their biggest television show, they were absolutely determined not to take the blame for it. They needed a scapegoat, and they decided to serve Patricia Richardson to the tabloid press on a silver platter. To understand the sheer brutality of what happened next, you must understand how the Hollywood public relations machine operated in the late 1990s. This was an era before social media. Celebrities did not have Twitter or Instagram accounts to speak directly to their fans or correct false narratives in real time. The flow of information was entirely controlled by massive media conglomerates, powerful publicists, and aggressive tabloid magazines. If a studio wanted to destroy your reputation, they simply had to feed anonymous quotes to entertainment journalists, and the public would consume it as undeniable fact. The corporate smear campaign against Patricia Richardson was launched with surgical precision. Almost overnight, anonymous inside sources from the network began leaking highly curated, entirely twisted versions of the boardroom negotiations to the press. The narrative the studio fed to the public was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. They did not tell the press that Richardson was an exhausted, newly single mother who simply wanted to go home and raise her children. They did not reveal that they had offered her exactly half of what they offered her male co-star. Instead, They weaponized the exact sexist tropes that have been used to discipline powerful women for centuries. The tabloids began running headlines framing Richardson as a diva. The anonymous sources claimed she was demanding, difficult to work with, and driven entirely by ego. The most insidious and highly circulated lie was that she was greedy. The press spun a narrative that Richardson had demanded an astronomical amount of money to return, and when the poor, innocent network couldn't meet her outrageous demands, she selfishly walked away, killing the show for everyone. The profound, sickening irony of this narrative is almost difficult to comprehend. Patricia Richardson was being publicly crucified for her greed, specifically because she refused a $25 million paycheck. She had literally chosen her children over money, yet the corporate machine successfully branded her as a greedy villain who murdered America's favorite family comedy. For Richardson, the psychological impact of this smear campaign was devastating. She was sitting in her home trying to be a present mother to her twins and her older child, watching her reputation be systematically dismantled on national television and in supermarket checkout aisles. The people she had worked with for 8 years, the executives who had promised to support her, the producers who had praised her acting, were now actively feeding her to the wolves to protect their corporate stock prices. She was experiencing the ultimate betrayal. The television network loved to broadcast wholesome 30-minute episodes about the importance of family, honesty, and integrity. Yet, the moment she exercised those exact values in her real life, the network used its massive power to humiliate her. But the corporate smear campaign was only half of the punishment. The most painful consequence of her defiance came from inside her own television house. Tim Allen, the man she had stood shoulder to shoulder with for 8 years, the man whose comedic timing relied entirely on her grounded presence, was furious. To understand Allen's perspective, you have to look at the staggering math of the situation, because Patricia Richardson said no, the 9th season was canceled. Because the 9th season was canceled, Tim Allen instantly lost his $50 million contract. In the span of a single afternoon, a fortune that would have cemented his status as the highest paid actor in television history vanished into thin air. And it vanished entirely because of his female co-star's decision. Tim Allen did not hide his frustration. He was a highly ambitious, fiercely competitive comedian who had built an empire, and he wanted to keep the empire running. While he did not launch a malicious public attack against her, his coldness was palpable both in the press and on the soundstage. In interviews given around the time of the show's cancellation, Allen made his disappointment explicitly clear. He publicly lamented the show's premature end, making sure the audience knew he was ready to sign. By distancing himself, he effectively threw her under the bus, allowing the media to focus all of the fans' anger and disappointment directly onto Richardson's shoulders. The dynamic on the set during the final weeks of filming season 8 became incredibly heavy and fraught with tension. The cast and crew knew they were filming the end of an era, but it was not a joyous, celebratory victory lap. It was a forced march. Hundreds of crew members, camera operators, lighting technicians, set designers were suddenly facing unemployment because the show was wrapping up. The studio environment, which the network had always marketed as a warm, loving family, was fractured by resentment. Richardson had to walk onto that soundstage every single day, look into the eyes of a crew that was losing their jobs, and look into the eyes of a co-star who had just lost $50 million. She had to absorb all of that unspoken anger, all of that icy resentment, and still hit her marks. She had to put on Jill Taylor's warm, loving smile, trade affectionate banter with Tim Allen, and pretend that they were the perfect, unbreakable American couple. The emotional compartmentalization required to film those final episodes was staggering. The scripts for the end of the 8th season were highly emotional, designed to give the audience closure. In the series finale, the Taylor family packs up their iconic Michigan home, preparing to move because Jill has received a job offer. The tears shed by the actors on screen during those final scenes were undoubtedly real. But they were not just tears of nostalgia. They were tears of exhaustion, frustration, and the heavy, complicated grief of a working relationship that was ending in collateral damage. When the director finally yelled "cut" for the absolute last time, the massive studio lights powered down. The iconic home improvement set, the living room where America had sought comfort for nearly a decade, was struck and broken down into scrap wood. Tim Allen walked away to continue his highly lucrative career in film and television, eventually launching another massive sitcom, Last Man Standing. He remained a protected, celebrated asset of the Disney Corporation, voicing Buzz Lightyear in the Toy Story franchise and starring in the Santa Claus sequels. Patricia Richardson walked away into a storm of negative press, carrying the heavy, unfair label of the difficult woman who ruined a good thing. The industry effectively placed her in the penalty box. While she continued to work steadily in theater, independent films, and a highly respected stint on the medical drama Strong Medicine, she was never again handed the keys to a major network empire. The system had punished her exactly as it intended to. But if you look closely at the trajectory of her life after the studio doors closed, a very different, far more triumphant narrative emerges. The network had stolen her reputation, and her co-star had withdrawn his warmth, but they had utterly failed to steal the one thing she was actually fighting for. In May of 1999, the series finale of Home Improvement aired on the ABC network. Over 35 million Americans tuned in to say goodbye to the Taylor family. It was a massive, historic television event. The audience watched Tim and Jill Taylor pack up their fictional Detroit home, tearfully reflecting on 8 years of laughter, marital compromises, and family growth. The illusion was perfectly executed right up until the final frame. But the morning after that broadcast, the reality for the two lead actors could not have been more drastically different. Tim Allen woke up as the undisputed, heavily protected golden boy of the Disney Corporation. Even though he had lost his $50 million payday for a 9th season, the Hollywood machine seamlessly caught him. He was immediately ushered into the next phase of his blockbuster career. He had the massively successful Toy Story franchise, commanding millions, to voice Buzz Lightyear. He starred in Galaxy Quest. He would eventually be handed the keys to another highly lucrative, long-running network sitcom, Last Man Standing. The industry did not punish him for the show ending. They rolled out the red carpet for his next act. Patricia Richardson woke up in a quiet house. Her alarm did not go off at 4 a.m. She did not have to drive through the dark to a studio lot in Burbank. She did not have to sit in a makeup chair for 2 hours to become someone else. Instead, she walked into her own kitchen, poured a cup of coffee, and began making breakfast for her actual children. The transition from being the matriarch of a billion-dollar global phenomenon to being a full-time single mother was immediate and absolute. The network executives had engineered a brutal smear campaign, attempting to brand her as a selfish, greedy diva who murdered America's favorite comedy. The tabloids had run their hit pieces. The industry gatekeepers had effectively placed her in the professional penalty box, sending a loud, unmissable warning to any other actress who dared to challenge the gender pay gap or prioritize her family over corporate profits. But as the weeks turned into months and the months turned into years, a profound truth began to emerge. The Hollywood executives had measured their victory entirely in the wrong currency. They thought they had destroyed her. They believed that by taking away her platform and sullying her reputation, they had won the war. What they failed to comprehend was that Patricia Richardson did not care about their currency. She did not care about the magazine covers, the Emmy nominations, or the corporate leverage. She cared about the school run. She cared about being sitting in the front row of the auditorium for her kids' school plays instead of receiving a rushed update about it from a nanny over a dressing room telephone. She cared about being present for the turbulent, confusing teenage years of her twins and her eldest child. She was finally doing the exact job she had been pretending to do on television for nearly a decade. When we look back at the corporate power play that ended Home Improvement, it serves as the ultimate unvarnished reality check regarding the hypocrisy of the entertainment industry. Television networks, especially in the 1990s, built entire empires on the concept of family values. They sold the idea of the sacred family dinner table to massive corporate sponsors like Coca-Cola, Ford, and Procter and Gamble. They preached the importance of honesty, maternal love, and parental sacrifice to hundreds of millions of viewers across the globe. They positioned themselves as the moral compass of the American living room. Yet, the absolute second that Patricia Richardson actually lived those values, the moment she enacted the ultimate parental sacrifice by walking away from an obscene fortune to care for her broken family, the network viewed her as a traitor. The system demands that actors simulate morality for profit, but it actively punishes them for practicing morality in real life. Hollywood loves a strong, uncompromising mother on the screen, but it absolutely despises a strong, uncompromising mother in the boardroom. They wanted Richardson to play a feminist icon who stood up to her husband on television, but they expected her to be a submissive, silent employee when they slid a deeply sexist, discounted contract across the table. By saying no to the $25 million, Richardson exposed the hollow, cynical core of family television. She proved that to the executives, family is just a marketable demographic. It is a product to be packaged and sold. But to a real mother, family is not a product. It is a biological imperative, and it is not for sale. Richardson did not entirely vanish from the acting world, but she radically altered the terms of her employment. When she eventually returned to television in the early 2000s, she did so on her own strict conditions. She accepted a starring role on the Lifetime medical drama Strong Medicine. She took a massive pay cut compared to her sitcom days, but in exchange, she secured something far more valuable: autonomy. The production schedule was manageable. It allowed her to work without abandoning her children. She proved that she still possessed incredible dramatic talent, but she flatly refused to ever again surrender her soul to a 16-hour corporate grind. Time is the ultimate equalizer in Hollywood, and it has a fascinating way of exposing the truth. As the years passed and the anger over the canceled 9th season cooled, the icy resentment between the two co-stars finally began to thaw. Tim Allen, older and perhaps more reflective about the incredible alchemy that made his early career possible, eventually recognized what he had lost. He realized that his comedic timing, his massive success, and his $50 million offers were all built on the solid, unshakable foundation that Patricia Richardson provided. He could not have been the goofy, lovable tool man without Jill Taylor grounding him in reality. In the 2000s, while Allen was starring in his new sitcom Last Man Standing, he reached out to his former television wife. He asked her to guest star on the program. Richardson accepted. When she walked onto the set and the two actors shared the screen for the first time in over a decade, the chemistry was instantaneous, electric, and undeniable. The studio audience erupted. It was a beautiful full-circle moment that proved something deeply important. Patricia Richardson never hated Tim Allen. She never hated the work, and she never hated the audience. She only hated the ruthless, soul-crushing machine that had tried to own her. By returning to share the screen with him on her own terms, as a guest star with absolutely no corporate strings attached, she demonstrated that she was not bitter. She had healed. She had survived the smear campaigns, the exhaustion, and the industry blacklisting, and she had emerged entirely intact. Today, the children Patricia Richardson sacrificed her career to raise are fully grown adults. The grueling 16-hour days, the frantic table reads, and the humiliating boardroom negotiations are relics of a bygone era. Home Improvement lives on in global syndication, a nostalgic time capsule of 1990s culture. Every day, somewhere in the world, a viewer flips through the channels and lands on an old episode. They hear the familiar revving of a power tool. They see Tim Allen make a disastrous mistake, and they watch Patricia Richardson walk into the kitchen, cross her arms, and deliver a perfectly timed, razor-sharp punchline. When you watch those reruns now, armed with the truth of what was happening behind the scenes, the show completely transforms. You are no longer just watching a highly profitable sitcom. You are watching a masterclass in human endurance. You are looking at a woman who is actively navigating a divorce, suffocating under the weight of maternal guilt, and fighting a systemic gender pay gap, yet still delivering a flawless, iconic performance every single week. We live in a culture that frequently equates wealth with success. We are conditioned to believe that anyone who walks away from $25 million has lost their mind. But true success is not measured by the size of a corporate bank account, and true power is not granted by network executives. Patricia Richardson possessed the rarest, most terrifying form of power in the entertainment industry, the power to walk away. She called the network's bluff. She looked at the flashing cameras, the global fame, and the obscene corporate wealth, and she recognized them for exactly what they were, an illusion. She traded a television empire for the quiet, untelevised reality of raising her children. It was the ultimate, bravest act of a real mother. The Hollywood system tried to break her for it, but she proved that while a network can cancel a television show, they can never cancel the unbreakable bond between a mother and her family.